The millionaire's son was dying, until a poor girl sprayed holy water, and the impossible happened. The rain had been falling since dawn, washing the city streets clean yet leaving everything gray. Inside St. Vincent's Hospital, where the smell of antiseptic and quiet despair mingled in the corridors, a young boy lay in a sterile room surrounded by machines. Their constant beeping filled the air, measuring what little life was left inside him. His name was Ethan Miller, the only son of billionaire entrepreneur Richard Miller, a man the city called the King of Steel. Ethan was only 9 years old, but his body had been losing the fight against a rare neurological disorder for nearly 2 years. Doctors from across the world had flown in, specialists from Germany, Japan, Switzerland, each leaving with the same helpless expression. There was no cure, no surgery, no treatment that could save him. Richard had everything a man could want: money, power, connections, yet none of it could buy what he needed most: time. He hadn't smiled in months. His once vibrant eyes were hollow, carrying the weight of every sleepless night spent beside his son's hospital bed. Outside Ethan's room, nurses whispered. They had never seen the billionaire like this: humbled, fragile, desperate. He was a man who could move mountains in the business world, but here, against death, he was powerless. That same morning, across town in a quiet neighborhood of cracked walls and muddy streets, a girl named Maya woke up to the sound of rain dripping through her leaking roof. She was 16, thin, and small for her age, but her heart was bigger than most. She lived with her grandmother, who sold flowers outside the church to buy food. Maya often helped her after school, arranging small bouquets with trembling fingers. She didn't have much, just an old coat, a pair of worn shoes, and a faith that never seemed to fade no matter how hard life became. Every night she prayed for strangers she had never met: the homeless man at the corner, the crying woman at the bus stop, even the people who ignored her. That morning, as she and her grandmother were packing the flowers under an umbrella, an ambulance siren passed by, heading toward St. Vincent's Hospital. Her grandmother sighed. "Another soul in trouble," she said softly. "May God be with them." Maya nodded. "Sometimes I wish I could help people like them," she whispered. "You already do," her grandmother smiled. "Kindness doesn't need money, Maya. Just heart." 2 days later, Maya was walking by the hospital after school. She stopped at the small chapel inside, a quiet place where anyone could light a candle and pray. The air was cool and still, filled with the soft scent of melting wax. As she knelt to pray, she noticed a man sitting at the back, a tall figure in an expensive suit, his head buried in his hands. His face was pale, his eyes red. It was Richard Miller, though Maya didn't recognize him. When she finished her prayer, she approached him timidly. "Sir, are you okay?" He looked up, startled. For a moment, he wanted to ignore her, another stranger asking questions, but something in her eyes made him pause. They were kind, pure, and full of concern. "My son," he said hoarsely. "He's dying. And I can't do anything." Maya's heart tightened. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "Can I pray for him?" Richard stared at her. "If you think it helps," he said bitterly. She smiled softly. "Sometimes, it's all we can do." She took a small bottle from her school bag, a cheap plastic bottle filled with water she'd taken from the church fountain. To her, it was holy water, not because of magic, but because of the hope she believed it carried. "Can I give this to him?" she asked. He hesitated. Part of him wanted to refuse, it sounded childish, foolish even. But another part, the father who had tried everything and had nothing left to lose, finally nodded. When they entered Ethan's room, the boy looked frail and pale, his breathing shallow. The monitors blinked like tired eyes. Maya approached quietly, holding the bottle in her hands. She looked at the child, then at Richard. "Sometimes," she said softly, "we have to believe in things we can't see." And with gentle hands, she sprayed a few drops of the water into the air above Ethan's bed. It shimmered briefly in the dim light before landing softly on his face. For a long moment, there was silence, nothing but the rhythmic beeping of the monitors. Richard stood frozen, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Then, something changed. Ethan's eyes fluttered open. Slowly. Weakly. His lips moved, forming a word. Dad. Richard froze. He hadn't heard that voice in weeks. The nurses rushed in, startled by the sudden movement. Ethan's heartbeat, once erratic, had steadied on the monitor. Ethan. Richard whispered, tears filling his eyes. The boy blinked and smiled faintly. I'm thirsty. Richard broke down, gripping his son's hand as tears spilled freely down his face. The room filled with the sound of quiet sobbing, the nurses, even Maya's. Over the next few days, Ethan's condition began to improve. The doctors were baffled. They couldn't explain it scientifically, there was no new medicine, no experimental procedure. Yet somehow, his body began healing. Richard sat by his son's bedside, but his eyes often drifted to that small plastic bottle sitting on the table. Maya had left it there before leaving quietly that evening. He tried to find her the next day but couldn't. No records, no last name, just Maya. For the first time in his life, Richard attended church that Sunday. Not because he suddenly believed in miracles, but because he wanted to understand what had happened. A week later, he found her. She was selling flowers outside the same church, her hands cold from the wind. When she saw him, her eyes widened. "Sir," she said, surprised. "How is your son?" "He's getting better," Richard said, still unable to believe the words. "The doctors say it's unexplainable." She smiled, her eyes glistening. Then maybe it wasn't meant to be explained. Some things just are. Richard looked at her, really looked, and realized how poor she was. Her clothes were thin, her shoes worn, yet her spirit radiated warmth. He reached into his coat and handed her a thick envelope. "This is for you. A scholarship, a home for you and your grandmother, whatever you need. You've given me something no one else could." But Maya shook her head. "No, sir. I didn't heal your son. I just reminded you to believe again." Her words hit him harder than any sermon or lecture ever could. Months passed. Ethan fully recovered. The story spread through the city, the billionaire's miracle boy. Reporters wanted interviews, scientists wanted explanations, but Richard refused them all. He knew the truth, the miracle wasn't in the water, but in a poor girl's faith that love and kindness still mattered. He changed after that. The man who once lived for profit began to live for purpose. He started a foundation in Ethan's name. One that funded medical care for children whose parents couldn't afford it. And every Christmas, he would visit a small flower stall outside the church, buying all the flowers from a girl who still refused to take his money for herself. Maya went on to study medicine through a scholarship he secretly arranged, becoming a pediatrician years later. She never forgot the boy in the hospital bed or the man who learned how to believe again. Years later, when Ethan turned 18, he stood on a stage at a charity gala organized by his father's foundation. Cameras flashed, people applauded, but his eyes searched the crowd until he found her, Dr. Maya, smiling proudly in the back. He told his story that night, of pain, faith, and the day a stranger walked into his hospital room with a bottle of holy water. He said, "It wasn't magic that saved me. It was kindness. It was hope. And maybe, that's the real miracle." The audience fell silent. Then, slowly, they rose to their feet, applauding not just for the boy who lived, but for the lesson they all needed to hear, that even the smallest act of compassion can change the course of a life. That night, after everyone had left, Richard stood by the window, watching the lights of the city flicker below. He thought of who he used to be, a man who believed money could fix everything, and smiled. He turned to Maya, who had stayed behind. You know, he said quietly, I used to think miracles were impossible. She smiled back. Maybe they're not. Maybe they just look different from what we expect. He nodded, his voice soft. You changed more than my son's life, Maya. You changed mine. She looked at him kindly. No, sir. You changed it yourself, when you decided to believe in people again. They stood there in silence, two very different souls connected by a moment that neither science nor wealth could ever explain. In the end, it wasn't the holy water that healed a dying boy. It was the courage of a poor girl who refused to stop believing. It was the compassion that bridged two worlds, one of wealth, one of struggle, and proved that faith, in any form, can awaken miracles hidden within the human heart. And somewhere in that city, under the same endless rain that once carried so much sorrow, hope began to bloom again, one drop at a time. Moral: miracles aren't always supernatural. Sometimes, they're simply the moments when love, faith, and kindness meet, and something impossible becomes real.